Hey guys, it's Miss Arlequin, and in this video we're going to look at a sample scrambled paragraph. This one comes from the 2007-2008 sample test. Alright, so in the first video I talked about some tips for doing scrambled paragraphs. One of the first things I mentioned is how I always read all the sentences all the way through one time. Then I go back and I reread them, and on the second reading, I'm really focusing on looking at key words, transition words, and any phrases within the sentence that are either pronouns or kind of serving as pronoun phrases where when I read them, they're raising questions in my head and they're making me wonder, like, well, who are they talking about? What is this? Phrases where I can tell it's referring to something that could have come from an earlier sentence or had to have come from an earlier sentence. Okay, so in the West, we are most familiar with world explorers who are of European origin. Marco Polo, a European who traveled to China in the 13th century, serves as a classic example. Perhaps the most far-flung of these lesser-known travelers was Ibn Battuta, a North African who left his birthplace of Tangier in the year 1325. Ibn Battuta traveled all over Africa and Asia, including China, Indonesia, and the Maldives Islands and the coast of Africa. Some lesser-known explorers, however, logged enough miles and adventures to make Marco Polo's journey look like an evening stroll. Battusta's journeying lasted 24 years and covered at least 75,000 miles, most of it by land, a record that would not be surpassed for another 500 years. Alright, so you probably noticed that as I was reading the sentences, I already drew an arrow linking two sentences together. That's because as I was reading those two sentences, it was incredibly obvious to me that those two sentences went together. In fact, I could tell that sentence R was coming before sentence S because this sentence clearly is the first one where they're introducing this explorer, Ibn Battuta, and then this next sentence that came directly after it is going into a little bit more specific details about the places Ibn Battuta traveled to. So I'm pretty sure those two sentences are linked together. I also noticed that he's talked about in this third sentence, you. There is a possibility that you could come between R and S, or maybe before. Well, it can't come before R, actually, because this is the first sentence introducing who he is. And it wouldn't make sense for you to come before that sentence, because why would you talk specifically about a person that you haven't generally introduced? In fact, another clue is the fact that in this sentence they mention his full name, and then in this sentence they only use his last name. You only start to use the last name of people after you've already mentioned their full name. So once you've said his full name, then in subsequent sentences that come after, you could just use the last name. All right, so I'm sure it's R, possibly U and then S, but I'm going to still use that same rationale even, that in this sentence you're using still his full name. You wouldn't do full name, only the last name, just to go back to the full name again in the third sentence. So I'm pretty sure it's RS, and then probably U is going to be the sentence after S. All right, so I'm going to go still back to my original strategy, though, where I want to look for keywords, phrases, transitions, questionable phrases that look like they are referring to previous sentences. Marco Polo, a European who traveled to China, serves as a classic example. Okay, a classic example of what? This could actually be the first sentence, because it could be that Marco Polo is a classic example of explorers who are of European origin. But I'm not going to commit yet. I'm going to now go down to T. Some lesser-known explorers, however, logged enough miles and adventures to make Marco Polo's journey look like an evening stroll. Okay, if this sentence is talking about Marco Polo's journey, this doesn't seem like an introductory sentence. This seems like I'm going to talk about Marco Polo's journey because I already defined for you who Marco Polo is. And so if I go back to sentence Q, I can see that this is a definition sentence. They're telling you or defining for you who Marco Polo is. Who is he? He is a European traveler. He is a classic example of somebody who has European origin. So I'm going to say that Q is the sentence that comes after our topic sentence. And then when I go to sentence T, I can see that this continues to talk about Marco Polo. However, What it's also doing, which is what makes it the second sentence that comes before all the rest of the sentences, is that it's introducing the idea, a new idea, that there are lesser known explorers. And so who are some of those lesser known explorers? Well, that gets introduced in sentence R. One of those lesser known explorers is Ibn Battuta. So Ibn Battuta, what did he do? We have S, that's the definition sentence that tells you where he traveled. And then this gives you a more specific detail about his travels, so it's building off of sentence S. A pretty simple paragraph, if you think about it. We should actually only be so lucky that all the paragraphs are this easy and quick to put together on the actual test.